make bread in our home. You'll notice this is a working kitchen, so we have lots going on, and we've got kids homeschooling in the background. So if you hear a few noises, that's what it is. Megan is doing what we call we're going to be proofing the yeast. So she mixes the yeast with a little bit of sugar. We use raw sugar. You can use honey or other sweeteners as well, but this is what we're using today. And so she'll mix in the yeast and sugar with warm water, and it'll sit for about 10 minutes until it's frothed up, and we'll show you that when it's done and ready. And meanwhile, she'll go ahead and mix the other ingredients, eggs and oil and more sweetener while that's proofing. So make sure it's nice to have everything on hand and a counter cleaned off and ready to go. Best always to use fertile or free-range eggs if you can. Okay, one note I want to mention is when you're using tap water, if you have city water, it's best to have a filter on it. We have well water, so we don't worry about that, but if your water has chlorine or fluoride or things like that, that can hinder the bread baking process, and it's not real good for you either. So try and get a filter to filter your water. So Megan is just putting all of the ingredients in so when the yeast is ready, she'll be ready to go. So you know, Megan is 14. She's been making bread for a couple of years. It's not a complicated process. As soon as their hands are strong enough to knead bread, of course the little ones like to help along the way anyway. But they can learn really young. My 10-year-old is learning to make bread right now. As you can see, our yeast mixture is frothed up now and it's ready to put in the bowl, and then we'll start mixing flour in. We just buy our flour. We buy whole wheat flour, organic when we can. If you have a grain grinder, that is definitely ideal to grind your flour just prior to it. But don't let that hinder you if you don't have a grain grinder. Go ahead and buy your whole wheat flour and just venture onto the bread baking. Megan's going to add 1 cup of flour at a time and mix it in as she goes, rather than just dumping it all in. This first part will take about 8 cups of flour. And you want, if you've ever made pancakes, you want kind of the consistency, maybe a little thicker than pancake batter. You can use different kinds of flour. You can use whole wheat flour. You can use spelt flour. That makes very good bread. It's nice to add rye flour. The batter here is almost ready. We'll let it sit for 20 minutes once we get, should probably put about another cup of flour in. It's not real precise, and every flour, whether it's a little bit older or a different type of flour, if you just ground it, will take a little bit different amount because it absorbs liquid differently. So we'll give you, as far as flour goes, approximate ingredients, approximate amounts, but it will vary depending on your flour quality. Alright, so it's been 20 minutes and Megan is now adding the salt. Don't forget the salt. We've done it a number of times and it doesn't turn out very good and it doesn't taste quite right. So she's just going to mix that in. The reason for waiting is because the salt inhibits the yeast growth, and we want to make sure that yeast gets a good start. So you wait the 20 minutes and then it'll have a good solid start to make sure you get a good rise. Again, Megan is going to be adding 1 cup of flour at a time, mixing it in good. Once she gets to the point where she can't mix it anymore, she's using a whisk here. I like to I have a bread hook. that I prefer to use. You can also just use a regular spoon. This is my bread hook that I like to use. Once she gets it too thick to mix by hand anymore, she'll dump it out on the counter. One note is if you have a KitchenAid or a Bosch, some kind of machine to do your kneading for you, the process will go a lot quicker, and you do need to be careful to not over knead with one of those kinds of machines. By hand, it's very difficult to over knead. Okay, Megan's putting plenty of flour on the counter because your bread is going to be very soft still at this point, and it's very sticky without a lot of flour. So you're just going to get a good, just keep moving it around and working that flour in, and whenever you need it, you just add a little bit more flour to the counter, and that'll help it to keep from sticking, and keep adding. You'll end up using around 22 cups of flour. Now this makes 5. We make 5 loaves at a time. You can cut the recipe in half easily. That's what the original recipe called for. But we have a large family and we go through a lot of bread. Megan separates it into 2 piles because it's easier for her to work with. I just knead it all at one time. It'll all need to be kneaded about 20 minutes by hand, 15 to 20 minutes. So you just have to factor that in. It is easier to work with a smaller batch, and so that's up to you. We've put about a tablespoon of oil in 2 bowls. 7-hour bread, so once we have it sitting, it'll be rising for 3 hours with the first rising. Show them how you kind of roll that in there so that all of it is covered with oil. We're covering this with a damp towel. We like to use the flour sack towels. They're available at most stores like Walmart or any place like that. They're nice and big and they don't have lint on them, but they do, just so you know, you want to set towels aside for covering the bread because they'll get oil on them and won't be good for drying any longer. 65 to 70 degrees if possible. Not if it's a little warmer than that. And a quick note about cleanup. You'll have a messy counter. Once you get that dry flour off, if you just let a wet rag sit on the stuff that's stuck on the counter, it'll come right off with a plastic spatula or something. So about 10 times, and then you're going to knead it and make it into another ball. And once you've done this, then you're going to let it rise another . Have our risen bread here, and Megan is punching it down like about 10 times, and then she'll knead it up into a ball. And we've already let it rise 3 hours and then punched it down, and this is the final punching down. We'll let it sit for 5 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and separate it into loaves. She measures them, and then she will form nice round balls out of the lumps she has. You try and get them as even as possible. If you don't have a little scale like we have here, you can just estimate and try and get them as close as you can. So you notice she's kneading it down, and she's got a nice round ball that will become the loaf. So that will be resting for 20 minutes now. We're going to recover them with the damp towel, and while we get the bread pans ready, and then we'll form the loaves in about 20 minutes. Make sure that each of the corners and all the sides is well oiled. You'll notice I have glass and ceramic or clay bread pans. My favorite are the clay ones. They're kind of spendy, but they're definitely the best. So you have to make sure there's not too much oil, or it can stick also. So she's going to be putting flour in this in just a moment. We go ahead and just let it fall on the counter, because when we make the loaves, it will be used at that time. Sometimes you have to push it down with your hands first, or if you get a lot of flour on, it'll be sliding around. Done. Megan's working so hard. So she kind of pinches it down as she goes. And the next loaf I'll have her slow down just a little bit so you can see a little closer of how she pinches it down. But a nice long roll, and then you're going to tuck the ends in so it will fit neatly in the bread pan. And then kind of push it down so it won't roll from side to side. So it flops over, then you get the seams up. So you want that seam down nice and tight. An hour and a half until it's ready. So we're going to go ahead and cover it again with the damp cloth. Have the bread that is ready to go into the oven. And enjoy.